From our studios in Princeton, New Jersey, here's what we're sharing today on Writers2Writers. You don't have to be famous to have an interesting life worthy of a book. So if you're thinking of sharing your story, we'll offer tips and insights on how to write a memoir. We'll also explore world building and how it's used to make a creative and consistent science fiction or fantasy novel. And we'll explore what it's like to work with a book editor. We'll talk about how all authors, both new and experienced, can benefit from this relationship. It's all coming up right now. Hello and welcome to Writers2Writers. I'm Keith Fritz.
And I'm Jennifer Sneed. We've got another great show for you, like our editing segment. Keith, I know you've been writing your novel. Have you worked with an editor before?
I have worked with an editor in the past. Let me tell you, it's a life-changing experience. I will never go back. This week, we asked writers to tell us about the project that they're currently working on in our Writers Reveal, and to do it in 15 seconds or less.
Currently, I'm working on a chick lit book about a woman who loses everything, her fabulous apartment in New York, her marriage, and she has to rebuild it herself. And the guy she starts seeing has some secrets of his own.
I'm working on a novel called Contraband about a nerdy New Jersey prison librarian who slips one of his inmate law clerks a Havana cigar, and that involves him in a dangerous love triangle and in a quest to recover millions of dollars of real property from a German real estate cartel.
The project I'm currently working on is a new adult romance series about 4 girls who each fall in love after meeting their significant others online. So the series is called The Virtual Search for Love.
Well, I just recently wrote about a tax auditor / bondage queen who lures men into her apartment and audits them, and if she sees any discrepancies, she whips them and tortures them and whatever. And I want to get the goods on her. I really want to get back and write that and make sure that she gets punished for that.
I'm currently working on a romance novel, boy meets girl. They're both serving in the military, and they have several obstacles to overcome, the greatest of which is the fact that she's been kidnapped.
If you want to write a memoir and you're looking for some guidance, we're here to help.
We've invited Paula Newcomer, writer and author of The Blueberry Girl. She'll offer steps to get you started and help you navigate those bumps in the road. Welcome.
Hi.
Why don't we start off with if a writer is preparing a memoir, but they don't want to do just a specific segment of their life, they want to do a whole span. Where does that writer begin?
Well, that's a good question. I teach a lot of journal writing, so I like to turn to my journal or have people, whether they're seasoned writers or whether they're new beginners, take a look at their journal and see what are the things they are already writing about. It's a kind of a manifesto of your own history, which is already in there.
Right, sure.
So are you writing about challenges that you've overcome in your life? Are you writing about love, requited and unrequited love? Are you writing about someone, a mentor, someone who's inspired you? And I think that's a good place to start.
To begin. No, what if you don't keep a journal?
Well, if you don't keep a journal, first thing I would say is you should if you're a writer. Just like
Good
you
point.
should read
Good
as
point.
much as you
Good
can.
point.
Especially a memoir writer.
Especially a
Check.
memoir writer,
Totally
right?
noted.
Read those memoirs, just like the poets who come and say, I want to be a poet and have never read a poem. Read those memoirs.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. And so read memoirs. And then also you can just begin to make a list of the things that are of interest to you. Travel writing. People want to talk about family members. Confessional memoirs are very popular.
So starting to write about parts of your life, even if you haven't kept a journal. Just start kind of jotting some stuff down.
Right. You can,
and then start keeping a journal.
Yeah.
Yes. Start
know
keeping
that
your
the-
journal, but also you can just do a list. Okay. Make a list of the things that interest you, that pop in your mind, where you get that little aha feeling.
Okay.
Yes.
I know you told us earlier about some of the prompts that you use to physically get started. Do you have something in I am a poem? It sounded very interesting. I know our viewers would really like that.
I do, and I like to start off for our viewers. For the viewers here, I like to start off a lot of my workshops with this because it's a great way to get to know everybody, first of all. And secondly, it kind of delves back into your childhood where a lot of your art and your memory is obviously placed. So it goes like this. If the viewers want to grab a pen, you're going to answer these 6 questions, okay?
6
You ready to
questions.
go? It's
Okay.
going to go quickly. So,
Ready?
want to do it?
I'm on it.
Okay. I am, full
Okay.
name.
Okay, full name.
I am, place you were born. I am who raised you.
Okay.
I am your favorite meal.
Okay.
I am your favorite song or lyric. And I am the thing that you always tell yourself when things are getting difficult and you want to say something positive.
Okay.
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 So,
Create that. You got the list.
I've
You
got it
down.
all. Here we go.
so you read it like this.
okay, how
like
do we
you're,
read it?
Like you're the way you use it is you read it like you're doing a slam poetry thing. So it's just I am, and you're just going to be big and bravado and read I am in front of each.
Okay. I am Keith Fritz. I was born in Boyertown.
I am
I am Boyertown?
That's it.
Oh, I didn't know it was Boyertown.
Own it.
I own it.
Oh,
I
yeah,
am
that's it.
Boyertown.
That's it. Now you got it.
I am my mother and father. I am pizza, apparently. I am Freebird, and I am happy.
Oh, that's nice. Okay, well, see, did you have any moments there where you felt like I could connect to this
I
and
think I
begin
have
to write
to call
about
my
it?
mother, yes.
Okay, see that?
Yeah.
Now, when I do this, every time I do it, I end up writing Grandma Emma on top of my parents' names I am raised by, because it goes back to my childhood where I was sitting with her at the farm table out in western Kansas, drinking a little cup of hot chocolate out of her
Brings you
china
back-
cup.
It brings the writer back to a
And it
memory
brings
from
me
before.
back to that, to where I could find, it resonates for me. So there's something about this that's just fun to get to know people, and then it also brings out something for you usually that you want to write about or pursue further.
Now you have all of this information. Now, how then does the writer decide what not to put into their memoir?
Oh, yeah.
To eliminate
That is hard.
big story.
I think that when you're writing your memoir, and first I think you should just write and begin to write your stories, and don't think about marketing or publishing it.
Okay.
Decide maybe who you're writing it for. Are you writing it for your friends, for your family, for yourself? It should be an adventure of discovery. And some people say that if you haven't had this sense of self-discovery in writing your memoir, then you should just delete the whole thing. Well, I wouldn't do that. But,
Wow.
you have to
don't like the delete
discover who you are as you're writing. So you take your theme, if you can figure it out. Like, here's a theme that Russell Baker used in his memoir. It's called, he was always told by his parents to be a certain way, and he always felt that he wanted to do something else. We all kind of have that in our life,
sure.
that the opposites, the dichotomy of that. And that makes for an excellent theme, an excellent way to start writing, too. Yeah.
I know that sometimes writing about yourself can be a bit of a struggle, and personally, I write fiction, so I'm not that familiar with memoir, and I know a lot of rules about fiction writing.
Right.
Are there rules about memoir writing that people could really utilize?
There are no rules about getting started. Like, I
Okay.
like to just write the pieces as they come, what you've decided you're going to write about that day, whether it's just I remember or I don't remember, whatever your prompt is for the day you've given yourself, or you've brought to share with someone in maybe your writing group. But about fiction, all the fiction techniques that you know are used in memoir now. If you'll notice when you read memoir, scenes are written always. There's a lot of dialogue. Some people are calling creative nonfiction part of the new memoir writing. So the things that you use to develop character, to show passage of time, to transition easily from one thing to next, they're all used.
So very, very similar, really.
And also the arc that you have, which I mentioned earlier, I think. The arc of transformation, or as they say in fiction, you get your character up a tree, you throw stones at him, and you get him down out of the tree. Well, you kind of do that to yourself if you're writing about you in the memoir as well.
Okay.
Now, how does a writer find their own style within a memoir? There's the different types of a memoir. So how do you know what's right for you as a writer?
Right. Are you a David Sedaris or a Marion
Correct.
Wink?
Sure.
I love those two because they're cynical and fun to read,
Right.
And or are you Annie Dillard,
Right.
who writes about nature so brilliantly?
Right.
I think that you want to read other writers,
Okay.
and you'll begin to see who you want to mimic.
And who you relate to a little
sound
bit
like.
more as a writer.
Read your material out loud and hear your own voice, hear the rhythms of your voice, and you'll begin to figure it out for yourself, I think.
Wonderful, Paula.
Yeah. Well, thank you so
Yes.
very much for coming in. We certainly enjoyed having you.
These are some
It's been
good
a
tips.
pleasure.
I like the exercise.
Yes,
We're
that
gonna.
was
I
we're
wish
gonna
I
take-
could have heard your I
You
am.
know, if we had more time, we'll practice. We'll practice.
Okay, very nice.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Hi, Keith again here. I also run a writing group at the Princeton Public Library. It's called The Write Space, and it meets on the second and fourth Tuesdays of every month. If people are interested in joining, it's as easy as show up whenever you would like to. We don't take attendance, we don't require, so when you can make it, great. When you can't, that's okay. From my experience, I've noticed that the kinds of people who do show up seem to be the ones who want a little bit more experience with writing, and that's because of the nature of this particular group. The format of the Write Space is prompting. The entire concept is to give people sort of a kick in the butt to make them want to write a little bit more. So we'll give a prompt, and you write for 10 minutes, anything. There are no rules, and sometimes we even break the rules, and that's acceptable. And then afterwards, we encourage people to read out loud to one another, which is another big part of the process. An example of a prompt might be, you wake up one morning and you have traveled back in time by one day. What do you do with it? Or, you're now a snowman. Have fun with that. They're all over the place. We get ideas from each other, and it's a lot of variety, and it's a lot of sometimes hilarity as well. No, a lot of writers groups tend to be very high stress for some people because they feel like they're going to be judged, like in a critique group might be sometimes. Here, because we laugh so much and we break our own rules, it's very lighthearted, and it gives people an opportunity to just not worry quite so much about what other people might think.
When you read books or watch movies like Lord of the Rings or Ender's Game, there's an imaginary world involved. It could include aliens or superpowers or take place in the future.
It's a world that's very different and yet at the same time very similar to our own. Creating and constructing how it all works is called world building, which is what we're going to explore today. Our guest is science fiction writer Mary Fan. Mary is the author of the Jane Colt series. Mary, thanks so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I know that science fiction and fantasy authors can talk about world building for days, so we're going to try to do a quick version here. How does the writer start?
Well, you want to start with what you really want your reader to get out of this book. Like whether it's an issue you want to explore, for example, I don't know, bioengineering or artificial intelligence. You want to start with that topic and build your world around that.
Okay.
And then what about, could you explain a little bit more about what you want the book to be about?
Well, the thing about science fiction is that it's usually tied to some issue that does affect our everyday lives. Sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's a bioethics question. And so you really want to explore how this would impact your characters, because ultimately that's what the reader's going to care about, is the people involved in the story, and then the plot kind of gets shaped around that.
Okay. So science fiction has this sort of perception of being infinite. It's limitless. Is there a way that the author can kind of grasp all of that and make it manageable?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to focus in on your characters, because the thing about science fiction is, like you said, it's limitless. You can explore worlds and go on about it forever. However, your story has to focus in on a few particular people, because that's what your reader's going to care about. They're going to want to follow one protagonist, or maybe two or three, but a small group of their favorites on a journey.
It sounds like sometimes that small group can represent so many infinite other possibilities.
Exactly. They're going to represent, a point of view. They're going to represent, a particular aspect of the culture you're building.
Okay.
Well, how deep do you have to go, or should you go, in terms of creating this world for your writers?
Well, there's really two levels of depth. There's the level for yourself as the writer, and then there's the level you portray in your book. And for yourself as a writer, you want to go a lot deeper than what might ultimately end up in the manuscript. You want to know, where this world came from, you want to know the history, you want to know how it's all connected, because that's going to affect your plot in ways that you might not realize, and it's going to help make your world more believable. But you don't want to jam that all into your story because you don't want to get bogged down in these kinds of descriptions and exposition when really your reader wants to know what happens.
So it helps you as the writer to create that a little bit better for the reader, but they don't necessarily need all these little details.
Exactly.
Minute details.
Yes.
Okay.
World building is a lot like it's like an iceberg. You have all these supporting documents. You have practically an encyclopedia, on your own computer. But the reader's only going to get that tip, and yet without everything else, that tip's not going to exist.
It won't work.
Yeah.
It won't work if you don't have the base.
So in the process of building this world, what kinds of common errors do you see other writers making? What can they try to avoid?
The biggest error I see is not being consistent within your own world. Because the thing is, readers will hone in on that. They're a lot smarter than a lot of writers give them credit for. And so if you set a rule for yourself and then you break it later, it's going to take people out of the world and into a place you don't want them to go.
Yeah, and then you've lost them as readers. They don't trust you anymore. Yeah, I can see that could be a very big problem.
Yeah. Although setting those rules in the first place, it's also very important.
Okay.
Because the last thing you want is some sort of boundless, amorphous world that doesn't make any sense. And so setting these limits for yourself helps keep it all contained, helps give it structure and shape.
Okay.
What surprises you about writing this world, this fictional world? What surprises you about it?
Well, the thing about writing is no matter how much you outline and, come up with backstories and whatnot, you're always going to have surprises along the way. Like, you could be halfway through your manuscript and suddenly realize you never explored this one aspect that you want to bring up. And so you really have to just, that's okay. You just have to be prepared for that.
I've heard that some good writers can become great writers depending on a number of different things. And I have heard that world building, the idea of creating this imaginary world ahead of time, can be the difference between a good story and a great one. Do you agree with that? Do you think there's any relevance to that?
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. Because a lot of the great sci-fi and fantasy books you think of, it's really the world, it has a life of its own. Like you mentioned Lord of the Rings, you could just think about yourself being there. It's really a vast universe, and the story you read in Lord of the Rings is just a piece of it.
Mm-hmm. So many other fantasy stories have built upon that one, so it's obviously one of the best that's ever been out there.
Yep, exactly. And what I think makes a great sci-fi or fantasy world is one that feels lived in, where you feel like, the story you have at hand, the story your characters are following, is just a part of something that's a lot bigger.
Okay.
One of the last questions we wanted to ask you is, how does a writer get all of this information to create this story that they're in, this world? How do they create this world and make it believable?
Well, the thing about sci-fi and fantasy that's so great is that it's all about what if. And so you can actually get a lot of inspiration from just the world around you. Like, you can look at the way things are and think, well, what if they were somehow different? Another thing is to just read a lot about the rest of the world. I find a lot of inspiration from the science sections of newspapers, for example, because they'll talk about cutting-edge technologies and new experiments, and then you start thinking about, well, what would happen if that came true? And so that's a good thing.
And then sort of how you can start to build and create this other world that doesn't really exist, and it will inspire you.
Exactly.
And I know there have been a few examples in real life where a science fiction author invented something and later it actually became real. So that can be really exciting to think that you might write something that one day will actually take place.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Keeping that in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This has been great. I think that people have a lot of basis to now start and create their own world. For the next
Hopefully.
Whether you're hoping to work with a publishing house or you've decided to self-publish, having your book edited professionally can add quality and value to your manuscript. But understanding the process and knowing how to make the most out of this experience is crucial before you begin.
Joining us is Jane Fransson, a freelance editor with the New York Book Editors, having edited 6 New York Times bestsellers and many others. She'll share her insights on that important writer-editor relationship. Welcome.
Thank you.
We know that there are a lot of editing services available out there. Tell us about a few of those.
Well, you can hire an editor to do almost anything you want them to do. It goes from copy editing and proofreading, which is catching typos and fixing your grammar mistakes, all the way up to ghostwriting, which some editors do, and there's sort of everything in between. Most freelance editors focus on line editing and developmental editing, which is big picture. It depends on what kind of book you're writing, but making what's on the page sound better, making the whole book read better, from plot and structure to dialogue to characterization, all that kind of stuff.
Got it.
Okay. So when you go about trying to find an editor as a writer, what qualifications are you looking for? Because I know it's a person-to-person relationship. It's not as simple as it might seem.
It's not. It can be one of the best relationships in a writer's world, and can be one of the most fraught relationships in a writer's world. And because it's so personal. I mean, all you writers know, once you put something down on a page, it's your baby. It's your thoughts and your feelings in your writing.
Definitely.
And hearing someone tell you it's not as good as you thought it was is a little bit rough sometimes. So what you want to make sure, first of all, is you're on the same page as your editor. So if you want them to not touch your words, just make it clean, fix your commas and periods, they need to know that. If you want an editor to completely rewrite your work and you have no qualms about ownership, then that's a whole nother thing. You just have to be on the same page. I really also think it's important to personally like your editor so that you get along, you get each other's jokes, you understand each other's personalities, you know what you both want from each other. So from a business standpoint, the relationship should be really clear what you want from each other. And from a personal standpoint, you should get along and kind of enjoy the process with each other.
So communication as well as the I guess you would call it the kinship between each other.
Yeah, I mean, people always say, I would never take on a book about something that I didn't agree with or I didn't enjoy reading, but some of my favorite books that I've edited are the kinds of books I would have picked up in a bookstore anyway. And that's hopefully the best I can bring to the table is a book that I'm really comfortable, because it's the kind of book I'd like to read anyway.
Well, that's another point then. Hopefully somebody who enjoys at least the genre that you're writing.
Yes, do not, if you're writing a biography of a 1800s historical figure, do not hire a freelance editor who specializes in sci-fi romance.
Right.
It's not going to work. It's not going to work. It's never going to work.
Walk us through where do you start? How does the editing process begin? I'm a writer, I'm going in, what do I do? What's step one?
If you're thinking of hiring an editor, it's usually because you've gotten as far as you can with your own work and with begging all your friends and family to read your manuscript and give you feedback on it. Usually people are ready to get to the next level because they either want to self-publish something, they want to find an agent, or they want to find a publisher. So once you've gone through what we just said of finding someone you think fits the bill, does the work in the kind of area you work in, you want to find out how they work, what kind of contract they require, how much they charge, if you're comfortable with all of that.
So ask them those questions up front. How much is it per hour? Is it per project? And you put that in.
Ask them everything. I mean, there are no dumb questions. A lot of us have websites set up so you can find out more about our experience, but a lot of it's personal. Each project, depending on if I'm editing a 20-page proposal for someone who already has an agent, or if I'm someone who just has written their first novel, it's a very different process. So ask all the questions you want. Ask about if it's a per project or per page or per hour fee. And again, see if you're on the same page, see if it's someone you're comfortable with. It's always good to know if they've had experience in, again, the genre you're working in, so that you think they're going to have good feedback for you. And really focus on making sure all your questions get answered before you start, because it's a business relationship above all. And you want to start the process knowing you're comfortable with what their plans are for you.
Okay, let's say that a writer is going to have an editor to do more than just looking for typos and simple things. I think it's called line editing. What kind of feedback can they expect to get from that kind of an experience?
There's a lot of what I hope to do is teach people how to write. And it sounds, the best writers in the world I've had people who are full-time New Yorker writers that I think my job is also to teach them to write better. Everybody needs to know tips and tricks for making words sound smoother, making dialogue run better. So if you're line editing, usually it's towards the end of the process. Developmental editing would be a little bit earlier on, again, making your book better.
Okay.
Making sure it's plotted well, making sure the pacing is right, making sure it doesn't bog down anywhere, making sure the characters are believable.
So developmental is broader, whereas line editing is very specific, even down to the very word.
Yeah, we usually tell people don't waste your money on line editing unless the manuscript is bang up, perfect, kind of
Makes
ready to
sense.
rumble.
Sure.
So the developmental part is making sure the big picture is in order. The line editing is making sure everything reads more cleanly. So a line editor will help you, this dialogue doesn't sound very believable. This paragraph makes me not like this character as much.
Okay.
You've really gotten off topic here and you're not furthering your thesis. All that kind of stuff is a tighter line edit, but all within a bigger developmental edit.
That makes sense to start with developmental and move on to, okay, great.
Yeah.
Now, once it's been edited, right? Now the writer makes those changes. Does the editor look at that work again and give you additional feedback since the first time, or no?
Yeah, that's another thing that you work out ahead of time. Sometimes, we call ourselves book doctors too, but sometimes people want you on board from the beginning to the end. If you've had a good relationship, I just had a fantastic relationship with a memoir writer who wrote the book. I edited 2 different drafts of it, and we found her a great agent in New York. She got more feedback, and she still wanted my feedback on a new draft she was working on for the agents, just because we got each other, and it worked out really well. But there are other people who want one quick edit, move on, I'm ready to publish, so you work it out ahead of time. But a lot of the time, it turns into a relationship. And if you've asked for changes, I'm always open to have authors come back to me, say, oh, can we talk about this? I changed the scene. I know you had a problem with it. I'd really love for you to read it and go through it. So a lot of the time it turns into a long-term relationship, which is really nice.
Yeah.
Okay, one last quick one for you, and this is a tough one, I think, for a lot of people. How does a writer go about finding the good editor when the time comes?
I mean, most of my best relationships come from personal recommendations. So if you can ask, if you're a writer and you're in a writer's group, ask your writer friends who they've worked with, if they've heard of anyone, if their friends know of anyone. You can certainly Google people. There's some great places online where there are a lot of freelance editors with great experience in the business. So Google helps. Looking at their experience helps, but I would always say ask writer friends of who they've had a good relationship. You'll find the best people
Sounds
that
like
way.
there's a pretty good chance they'll find somebody out
Yeah,
there.
most writers, it's a small world. We all know each other at
Yes,
some
yes.
point, right?
Yes. Jane, thank you very much. These are some really helpful tips that we can
Yes.
follow to make sure that our book gets edited
I know
appropriately.
our viewers enjoyed it.
Oh, good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you're a writer or hoping to be a writer, consider joining a writers group. Here are a few in your area. The Princeton Public Library sponsors 2 writer groups, each one on alternative Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Formats include readings, feedback, and writer's prompts. Contact the library for more details. The Princeton Writers Group meets at many locations throughout central New Jersey on multiple nights of the week. It's an informal environment where you can come, bring your computer, and simply write, surrounded, of course, by other writers. Check out their meetup page at meetups.com. And the Plainsboro Writers Group meets monthly at the Plainsboro Library at 7 p.m. Writers may share prose, poetry, plays, commentaries, or other works. For more information on these and other writers groups, or to have your writers group listed, go to our website at Writers2Writers.com.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We'll see you next time for Writers to Writers.